The first paper sculpture technique that I'm going to share is called rolling. Rolling is actually pretty simple. I'm just going to take a piece of paper and I'm just going to roll it up. So if I just roll it up by hand and kind of hold it for a moment or so, it will actually kind of curl and it will become three-dimensional. A way I can actually make it curl more without really bending up the paper is to actually use the edge of the table, or in this case I'm going to use the edge of this box. And what I'm going to do is lay the paper flat on top of the box. I'm going to kind of hold the paper to the top of the box lightly with this hand. I'm going to pull straight down with this hand so the paper actually bends. And then I get sort of a curve. And I can actually go the opposite direction and do the same thing. And that starts to give me an S-curve. So of course the more I do that, the more it's going to curve and the more it's going to roll. So this gives me a free-form kind of rolling. So that's one thing that I can do. That's one way I can roll. Another way to roll and create some simple forms is actually to roll a cylinder. So I like to take a piece of paper and I like to roll it first so that it is actually curved and it kind of has that memory of a curve. It will actually make it hold its form a lot better. Okay, so I've got the paper curved, got it rolled. Now what I'm going to do is use glue, and I've got a little bit of glue here. I'm going to actually apply it with a paintbrush. This gives me a lot more control of the glue. I'm putting it on the inside edge of my paper. Just a little bit of white glue. Okay, and then I'm going to just roll this back over. I'm going to tuck that side in, and I'm going to tuck it under, and I'm going to hold it. So I'm going to use the table. I'm actually going to put my fingers in there, and I'm going to roll it. When I glue, I like to do what I call the 30-second rule, and that is I'm going to hold this paper for about 30 seconds. If after 30 seconds it doesn't stick, that's because I either used too much glue and it just pops apart and the glue hasn't dried, or I haven't used enough glue and the glue is totally dried before it actually stuck together. Okay, and so that quickly I've got a cylinder. That's my first form. Another rolling technique is to actually create a cone. So I can take my paper and take a compass. I like to use these safety compasses. They're actually very easy to use. And I'm going to draw a circular shape, not a full circle, but part of a circle. I actually think of the old arcade game Pac-Man. I'm actually going to draw a Pac-Man shape. So the way I use a safety compass is I lay this down. This part right here is going to be the center of my circle. So I always mark the center of my circle in case my compass moves. So if it moves, I can always put it right back where it needs to go. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw my circle. I want to be careful not to draw it too big. So I'm going to kind of move my compass around. So I hold the center part still. And then I'm going to go ahead and decide about how big it needs to be. Okay, and then I just kind of rock my hand back and forth. And I get the outside of a circle. Notice that it goes off the edge of the paper. That's exactly what I want. So my center of my circle actually is not in the center of my paper. It's actually closer to one edge. And then another reason I like these safety compasses is that they have built-in rulers. And I'm actually going to draw in Pac-Man's mouth. So I'm going to line up the center of the circle with the end of my line there that actually is close to the edge of my paper, and do the same thing over here. Okay, and then I'm going to just cut that out. A tip about cutting with scissors, and especially a round shape like this, I want to actually turn the paper. So as I cut, my scissors pretty much stay still. They turn a little bit, but I'm turning more of the paper, and I'm going in kind of short strokes, okay, instead of trying to cut it all out at one time. So my paper turns, not my scissors. And then I'm going to cut Pac-Man's mouth out. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a cone out of this. And I want to be careful of the pencil lines. So whenever I do this, what I'm going to do is actually have the corner of Pac-Man's mouth here be the top of my cone, but I want to hide the pencil marks inside the cone. So I'm actually going to bend these 2 points toward each other and really line up this line with that line. And then I kind of tuck one under the other, and that gives me my basic cone form. To make it a little bit skinnier and a little bit taller, I'm going to kind of walk the inside part of this around with my thumbs, and then I've got my cone. And then I'm just going to spread a little bit of glue, and then I'd sit down and I would hold it. I don't need to do that, I already have one made. Okay. So here I have my cone. The next technique is folding. Folding is pretty simple. I can just take a piece of paper and I'm just going to fold it. I can fold it straight across and just crease it. I can use my fingernail or my thumbnail or a spatula or a bone folder to really crease it well, make sure that it's really flat. And that creates a three-dimensional piece of paper. I can get kind of fancy with it and fold it in different directions and have diagonal folds and whatnot. And then when that stands up, I've got something totally different. I've got a free-formed folded sculpture going. Okay, so that's a simple fold, but I can actually take my cylinders that I've made earlier and I'm going to create some other forms out of them. Okay, so the first form I'm actually going to create by folding a cylinder is a square prism. And when I do a square prism, I'm just going to actually squish my cylinder flat. I'm going to go ahead and just press it down, and I'm going to fold the edges, really crease them well, and then I'm going to pop it up. Now to get a square prism, I'm actually going to line these two corners up because a square has 4 equal sides. So without measuring, I can just line those up, crease them, flatten out my creases, and that simply I've got a square prism. Okay, and then from another cylinder I'm going to go ahead and create a rectangular prism. Rectangular prism, it starts out the exact same way as a square prism. I flatten both sides, just squish it down flat. And then instead of lining up my corners, I'm going to squish it so that my corners are offset, so that they're not even. And what that does, it gives me a long side and a short side. So here's my long side, here's my short side, and when I pop it up, I have a rectangle. And then the final form I'm going to make out of my cylinder is actually a triangular prism. For a triangular prism, I want to be careful because I'm only going to squish one fold at a time, and I'm going to make 3 folds. So I'm going to take my cylinder and I'm going to just squish. I always work near the seam so I can hide it. Really crease it down, and that gives me a teardrop form. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick another spot, not halfway because then I can't do a triangle, but somewhere over here, and go ahead and just squish it down. So that way I have 2 folds, and that gives me sort of a mailbox form. And then at the top here, I'm just going to pinch that together and do my third one, and that gives me a triangular prism. Just like a cylinder, I can actually take a cone and squish it, and instead of creating a prism, I'm actually going to create a pyramid. So I'm going to take my cone and I'm going to go ahead and squish it and flatten it. I'm going to smooth out my creases. Okay. I want a nice square pyramid, so I'm going to take my corners, line them up, and squish that flat. And do the same thing. Flatten out my creases. And there I have my pyramid. But the only problem with this is that my bottom isn't straight. So if I flatten my cone again, I can actually take my scissors and cut the bottom flat. And so then I'll have a nice pyramid. Another folding technique is actually something that I learned called cat stairs. And what I'm going to do is actually glue 2 strips of paper together, but I'm going to glue them perpendicularly. So that way they form a right angle. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue up here, and I'm using 2 contrasting colors so that you can really see how this is done. And I think it actually makes a really interesting visual effect with the two contrasting colors. But you can do the same color. Okay, just hold that for a second, make sure that it's stuck down. Okay, so I'm going to leave this lay flat on my table here, and what I'm going to do is to actually fold the one that's on the bottom, in this case the red, over top of the yellow. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to leave it flat on the table. I'm going to fold red over yellow, making sure that my fold is right at the edge of my yellow strip, and that it's nice and straight, that everything stays nice and parallel and perpendicular. So now it's yellow over red, again making sure that it's nice and straight, and then it's red over yellow. So it's always the bottom one over the top one. And it's really important to keep this flat on the table, because I've seen a lot of people do this and they'll pick it up and they're not really paying attention to what's on top, what's on bottom, and instead of having a spring, which will be the end result, they just have a big wad of paper because they folded it incorrectly. So red over yellow, yellow over red, so just back and forth. So again, I'm trying not to pick up my paper from the table, or at least the whole thing. I pick up these ends, of course, and fold them over. And if I want the cat stairs to be really long, to have a really long spring, this is the point where I can actually glue another yellow strip on and then another red strip on. But I'm just going to keep doing that back and forth. Red over yellow, yellow over red. Trying to take my time to make it nice and neat, nice and straight. Okay, so those strips get shorter and shorter, and then eventually I'm going to get to a point where I can glue them. Okay, so my yellow one was a little bit longer, not a big deal. And then what I'm going to do is put a little bit of glue right here on this last red piece, and then just hold it down for a second. Just kind of squeeze it in my hand, and then I can take my scissors and trim off this last little bit of yellow, and then I will have my cat stairs spring. I can kind of pull it out a little bit more so that you can see it. The next technique that I'm going to show you with paper sculpture is a curling technique. There are two different ways that I can curl a piece of paper. The first is to take a rounded object like the handle of this stylus, which I'm going to use later for scoring, but I'm going to take my thin strip of paper and actually roll it around my stylus. That's probably the easiest way to curl. And it's just going to roll up on itself, and then I'm just going to pull it off. Oops, and there I have my curl. If it's a little tight, I can just take my fingers and kind of relax that curl a little bit. So that's my first way of curling. The second way of curling is probably what a lot of people know from doing ribbons. And when you do ribbons for presents and things, you actually use a pair of scissors. A lot of people want to open their scissors, but you don't even have to have them open. So I hold my scissors like this, and I stick the strip between my thumb and the scissor blade. And the key to this is actually to have a bend in the paper as I pull it. So as I pull it, that paper actually bends about 90 degrees. And that gives me my curl. So kind of see it from a different angle. It's like that. You don't have to go fast. And I don't really want to clamp down hard with my thumb because I can actually rip my paper. The nice thing about this technique is I can actually come back on the opposite side and do a curl that goes in the opposite direction. So now that gives me a nice S-curl.